Hey guys, Scott here. Today we're going to have a long, in-depth discussion about whether or not Dead by Daylight has actually gotten harder for killers. This has been a community sentiment for the past week now. I've reacted to a couple of videos surrounding this, so this is not just a small thing. This is a very widespread sentiment. People in my comment sections are arguing with me, saying that it absolutely has been. And let me be clear first off, saying I'm not going to sit here on an arrogant hill and say, no, your experience is wrong. I can't tell you what your experience has been. All I can do is hopefully provide evidence that things really have not changed very much at all. And some of the things that people are complaining about are actually good, not bad. So that's all I can do. But obviously, I can't change what your perception of the difficulty of these matches has been. If you're finding the games harder, then that's accurate to you. I'm not saying you're wrong here. Let me just show you what I mean when I say a lot of this is kind of just based on things I don't find to have a very, very strong foundation. So let me extend an olive branch and start with the first point that people are bringing up here. People have been going over the fact that the games are harder because people are not able to disconnect anymore. They're not able to, well, they can still disconnect. See, like I'm still having people disconnect the exact same amount that I would have people kill themselves, but the whole point is people are less likely to give up now because the penalties are based on, trying to kill yourself on hook now. Really, the only way out of it is just disconnecting. And that'll get you a penalty, but now, killing yourself on hook repeatedly will give you a penalty as well. So people are basically playing games out for longer. And this is making people feel like matches are harder because now they're actually playing against full teams more often. Which is obviously silly because this is how the game should work and this is objectively a good thing for the game's health. But I do understand if you're used to maybe, 25% of your games being essentially 3v1s, you might be under the impression that the game is a bit easier than it actually is because those matches are kind of free and almost impossible to lose. So I can understand where that sentiment comes from, but let me go over what I originally said. I have found that most of the disconnects or give ups that have happened in my games in the past couple of years have been when the game is sort of a foregone conclusion already. And then a lot of people counter by saying, what are you talking about? I have people that will just it's not a foregone conclusion. They die in the first 20 seconds, like that Meg, for example. And, the game wasn't a foregone conclusion there. I need people to realize that we're actually agreeing, that we're not saying different things here. Let me explain what I mean. So the first chase is by far the most important chase in the entire game. It sets the tone of the entire match. It determines, how quickly that person on a hook's not doing a gen, how quickly someone has to get off of a generator to go save that person so they're not on a gen. You can intercept that guy, forcing a third person to come off your gen to save while you're chasing the second guy. Suddenly one guy's on a generator based on how quickly you got that first down. The first down is by far the most important. So when we have a scenario like this where 20 seconds into the match, I down a player and they disconnect, you are using that as an example of the game's not a foregone conclusion that someone's just mad they died really quickly. No, I'm telling you that kind of is a foregone conclusion. We're actually saying sort of the same thing here. Because in that scenario, if you're getting it down in the first 20, 30 seconds of the match, you're almost definitely going to win as killer. I'm not saying it's a guaranteed win. Of course, there are upsets that happen, but it's heavily, heavily skewed in your favor if you get it down that quickly. So people using that as a defense against this topic by saying that I have people that DC for no reason at the start, well, you're kind of saying the same thing. Killing people that quickly means you pretty much win the game. So that's why I don't notice that much of a difference, because whether they were doing that before or after the changes, it's the same result. Like if they give up or don't give up, I still got it down in the first 20 seconds of the match. That pressure is almost impossible for survivors to come back from. Again, most of the time. There are exceptions, obviously. But I just wanted to clarify that point there. Now, obviously, there are other scenarios, too, where someone DCs when there's 4 hooks at 5 gens. Yeah, that's even more of a foregone conclusion. But getting a quick down at the start of the match is very often a predictor of who is going to win. So that's why I kind of likened them to the exact same point. Next, let's go over the whole healing thing. People have said that healing has gotten a lot better. The changes made to some healing perks have made healing unbearable. Because of that, people are spending less time healing, more time on gens, thus games go faster, thus games are harder. Logic makes sense, except the changes to the perks really didn't do that much at all. So let's actually specifically go over what people are complaining about, like botany knowledge and desperate measures and things like that. So botany knowledge heals the exact same speed. The only change that happened here is you don't have a 20% penalty on medkit efficiency. So this means before you could do this exact same build, brown medkit and botany knowledge, but you'd have to use one brown charge add-on, which you have 7,000 of. Now you don't have to use that brown charge add-on. Other than that, it's the exact same thing. There's no real difference between the speed you can heal yourself with a medkit. You can still heal yourself in 16 seconds. You can still do it multiple times if you want. There's also things you can do to rebuild your medkit. Like, these are things that you've already been able to do minus one brown add-on. So if people are saying they're just losing all their games now because of one brown charge add-on to a medkit, I don't buy it. That doesn't make any sense to me. And it's the same counter it had before. If you don't want people to have efficient self-heals with Botany and a medkit, bring Franklin's Demise. Just bring Franklin's and hit them once. Chase them for 10 seconds. Their medkit is effectively dead. They can no longer fully self-heal. You just have to change with the meta. You can't just complain that healing is OP and then just do nothing about it. There are plenty of things you can bring to make this better. Now, I'm not even saying bring Sloppy Butcher anymore because they kind of nerfed that perk. It's really all about the Franklins. Franklins neuters the self-heal from this completely. Suddenly, it's not as big of a deal anymore. Other than that, if you're complaining about just Botany knowledge with no medkit or anything, the perk has been like that for like 6 years. Like, it's the same perk. Nothing has changed there. So I don't know where like the complaints have come from. People are even bringing up Desperate Measures. Desperate Measures went from 14% per stack to 20% per stack. And you can have up to 4 stacks, so it's an 80% max versus a 54% max. These are the differences between them. But if you really think about the math, let's say worst case scenario, you've got 4 survivors injured, so you have the maximum penalty, or the maximum benefit rather. So 80%, you're going to heal, instead of 16 seconds, it's going to be more like 8.8 seconds around that area. But before, pre-buff, it was like 10 seconds. It's a second of difference. I promise you're not just suddenly losing all your games because of a 1 second faster heal in the worst case scenario for killer where everyone's injured and you have maximum Desperate Measures value. This is what I'm trying to illustrate to people. There have been changes to things like this that might seem bad when you really think about what has changed. Body Knowledge requires 1 less brown medkit add-on, and Desperate Measures heals about 1 second faster. It's really not that different. This is not suddenly making you lose games, and I'm going to have to say that's just copium on that part. It's just not making you lose more games. People are also bringing up Resurgence, too. Like, the perk wasn't even changed. This is just not even people complaining about the game being harder. People are complaining about players rediscovering a healing meta that already existed. And if that's your complaint, you just weren't prepared to deal with a healing meta because you just, weren't ready for it or something like that, that's fine. But it's not like the game itself got harder. It's just players have changed to something else and you haven't adapted to it yet. But I feel like that's unfair to blame the game itself for getting harder. Like, there's a difference between your matches being harder because players are different and the game being made harder for a killer because of systemic changes to killer or systemic buffs to survivor or things like that. That's the main difference I want to kind of illustrate here. And they are very, very different things. So if you are having a problem with Resurgence and Botany Knowledge with a medkit, people popping off the hook. This is a build I was doing last year. If you're having a trouble with that and they're getting off the hook and healing themselves in, 3 seconds because they have a medkit. Again, Franklin's completely removes their ability to self-heal off the hook. But what if you're worried about someone else healing them very quickly? Bring Gift of Pain. If you bring Gift of Pain and put them on a Scourge Hook, as they are being unhooked, they have Hemorrhage apply immediately. They're going to lose about 30% of the Resurgence bar just off the cuff because you can't immediately heal or be healed as soon as you're off. And as long as you're within 40 meters, which means you can get there within 6 or 7 seconds and just be in the general vicinity of them, they have to run. The Hemorrhage bleeds them out. They have lost all of their perk benefit. There are things in the game that you can do to deal with this stuff. You can't just have the meta change and then just go, oh, that's it, game's broken. Just slap on Gift of Pain. You've countered half the shit you're worried about now. And I don't deny the healing meta is strong. I have constantly requested nerfs to Survivor healing, be it the old Circle of Healing, gold green medkits, things like that. Survivor healing can absolutely be out of control. But nowadays, there are things that you can do to deal with it. Also, Gift of Pain is now a universal perk. You don't even need Pinhead anymore. It's called Weeping Wounds, I think, now. So there's not even an excuse that you can't run that perk. So there are plenty of things you can do to combat this stuff. And I don't think it's fair to say the game is harder when just the player meta has shifted and you've chosen to not adapt to it. I guess that's the point I want to hone in on. Now, next, there is another point that people are bringing up that has just blown my mind. People are trying to say that the spawn changes have made killer harder. by survivors spawning together, the game is now harder for Killer because survivors can pop a generator before you even get there. So first off, before we even go any further, I would like to offer a very quick summary and guide on how to find survivors within 10 to 20 seconds of starting almost every single match. Just a couple of exceptions like Hawkins and Larry's. You don't have any like distant crows or line of sight. Indoor maps are typically a lot smaller, so you can get to places faster, but you also are kind of just blindly looking, which is why everybody kind of hates indoor maps. But every other map in the game, you should be able to find a survivor within 10 to 20 seconds of the map starting. So very quick little guide right here on how to do that. Okay, let's actually visualize this. We'll go full pirate software, except without being a douche. Here, let's even do this. Here we go. And all right, perfect. Here we go. Now we've got the proper cadence to be very trustworthy here. All right, so you're gonna make this the actual map right here. Big old square. Not all maps are like this, but this is just how it works. So let's say we got a generator kind of here. We got a generator kind of here. We got one right here. Let's say one's kind of right here. One's right here. One's right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, one more. And let's say there's one right here. Whatever. So let's say the killer spawns right here. Now the survivors obviously can't spawn at this generator. They can't spawn at this generator. They can't spawn at this generator. This one's pretty unlikely because it's on the same side, but it's possible. So pretty much your cone of attack here is kind of like that. That's really where you have to be patrolling and going at the start of the match. So you really only have to look at kind of like 3 generators. So your overall route would just be to walk this way, kind of position yourself between these 3. Do I hear anything here? Do I hear anything here? If not, then they're here pretty much 100%. So in that scenario, it should be pretty quick to find a survivor. Now, sometimes you get really unlucky and you spawn in the middle of the map. That's not supposed to be happening anymore, and I do figure they will be fixing that, but let's pretend they don't fix that. Let's say you spawn here. That's a lot more complicated because now they could be at really any of these outliers. So you have 4 options instead of kind of a cone you can just go to. So the best thing you can do here is just kind of peek your head in all of these directions and look for distant things. Scratch marks, crows, any movement at all. And then just kind of like stay in this inner circle. Don't actually go to each of the corners. You want to stay in kind of this inner circle or inner square. And I guarantee you will see signs of movement or crows flying up in the distance or scratches or something like that. You don't actually have to just spend all of your time going here, then here, then here, then here. That's going to take forever. You just kind of dip your toes in the general area of where things are, and you'll still find people pretty quickly. It might take a bit longer if you do get unlucky with the middle map spawn, but that is the best way to do it. Oh my god, I can't handle this. Oh, Jesus. All right, with no movement abilities, we're just going to find where the survivors spawned as quickly as possible. I have spawned in this kind of area, so we know there's going to be a cone roughly this way where we got to look for people. I'm not going to use fly. I'm just going to run and look for people. I already saw a crow fly up here. I already found people, and there we go. First chase will be starting, in 5 seconds. Someone's here. Chase started. Make it harder, let's find the biggest map in the game, which apparently is Shelter Woods. I just learned that. I thought Crotus Prent Asylum was, but apparently it's actually Shelter Woods. So let's pick Shelter Woods, the biggest map in the game, and try to find survivors as quickly as possible again. All right, so we know they're going to be somewhere in this kind of cone. It can be anywhere in this general direction. So we're going to go towards the middle, the most common congregation spot first, and then look for any signs of crows or scratches in the distance. Not seeing any there. And we already found a survivor. Next, let's actually go to Asylum. I thought this was the biggest map, and honestly, when I'm trying to find survivors, I find this map to be the most difficult or the most time-consuming overall for killers that do not have movement abilities to find survivors. So let's try this one and see how quickly we can find survivors here. All right, looks like we're in kind of one side of the map here. So this cone is a lot bigger. It can be these 2 or these 2. So what I'm going to do is kind of go towards the middle here, see if I can see any scratches or crows flying up. I could not there. Don't see anything there. I already found a survivor. Just crossing to the other side of the map, I found a survivor. First chase is on. I hear that generator. I know where 2 people are now. So in the first 10, 15 seconds, I already know where half the team is. Okay, so that was just a couple examples of how to find survivors quickly. So in that scenario, you should be able to find survivors within the 40 seconds before they're able to pop the first gen. But you know what? Let's just say that doesn't happen. Let's say you get a really weird middle map spawn on a big map. You happen to choose the wrong direction 3 times. Worst case scenario. And you lose that generator before you even find a single person. I still need to illustrate, we'll just use basic math here, how that's still preferable than 3 separate people being on 3 separate gens and you find and chase one guy. So if 3 people do a generator, let's say they take 5 seconds to walk to it or whatever, it's just 40 seconds roughly to finish that generator. Because for every survivor that's repairing it, you repair the generator significantly slower. That's why grouping up on gens, unless it's like the last one in a 3 gen, is almost always a bad idea. So in that scenario, you've lost 100% of one generator in 40 seconds. The alternative is you have 3 survivors and 3 separate generators. They're going to do, 40% of 3 separate generators in the same time frame. So now you've got 120% progress loss versus 100% lost. Math-wise, it's objectively worse for the survivors if they spawn group up and do 100% of one. Not only that, it makes it much harder for them to not 3-gen themselves. There are so many downsides to grouping up like that on the gen. And when the killer finds you, he now knows where the entire team is. If he sees a killer with any form of lethality, he can just straight up snowball off of you all being grouped up. It is always worse to have survivors grouped up at the start, every single time for the survivors. Now, people have brought up a example of a psychological effect that I think I can actually kind of agree with. So some people said, okay, fine, the game might not actually be harder, but people might be thinking it's harder because the mental, distress on hearing the first gen pop in 40 seconds is worse than having 3 gens pop but 2 minutes later or something like that. Even though the second scenario is much worse, having that first gen pop might make people really discouraged at the start. So there might be a psychological effect. Even though it's not actually harder, it might feel like it is. And I can understand that. That's a completely reasonable take. But let me just let people who think that in on a little secret. The first generator doesn't matter at all. It's the least important generator to pop. And if all of them rush the first one, the map is going to be easier to control because they're not going to be preventing a 3-gen in any way. If you have 3 separate people go out in a triangle formation and do 3 equidistant generators, you're not going to have a 3-gen just right off the cuff. So in that scenario, it's still completely okay. Losing the first generator is just not that important. The game naturally starts off very killer-sided and gets it starts off very survivor-sided and gets more killer-sided as the match progresses. As resources dwindle, as the map effectively gets smaller and there's less generator space effectively. It's you don't have to chase people into dead zones anymore with no generators. It's just a waste of time. So as the game progresses, the game gets more and more killer-sided. It's not crazy to lose a generator even before you're first down, especially if they've all rushed the same generator. Now, what's really scary is if your first chase takes a minute and a half or whatever, and you lose 3 gens. Those are the games you lose, but that can't really happen unless people spawn pre-spread out, which is why it's such a bad thing for a killer if they do. So I just want to make that clear. Losing the first gen quickly is much more preferable than to a bit slower losing 3 gens across the map. It just is. There's no other way to sugarcoat that fact. So I hope people can come to terms with that, because there were so many people arguing with me and they're just confidently incorrect. And I don't mind when people are wrong and they're open into learning, but people were calling me stupid and not realizing, oh no, this is better. And the best part about this is people don't even know what they're talking about. People are saying that this is some new crazy spawn logic for survivors now. And because of this new logic, we're not able to deal with it. Guys, this is how the game has worked for 9 years. About half the time you would spawn with your team. And the other half is what they removed, the outliers, where there would be 2 and 2 split across the map, or 3 split across the map. They just made it so it's always that first thing, but that would happen all the time. Mysteriously wasn't an issue for 9 years, and now suddenly it just is an issue now. This is not a new thing. This is how the game has worked. They just removed the bad outlier. So this is not even a new thing people are complaining about. It's already existed, and it's really frustrating to people act like this is some crazy new thing that's happening. There have also been a couple of other possible explanations as to why people are thinking this. Some people are saying, well, there's a lot more players now, so maybe the MMR is more accurate. You would think more players, that means you're able to get more accurate matches because it doesn't have to search as wide. That would be true if the queue times weren't absolutely terrible for killer. So for those who don't know, when queue times are worse, the MMR range gets wider and wider and wider and wider. And killer queues are minimum 5 minutes now. Honestly, I'm getting 5, 6, 7 minute queues, which means based on how their matchmaking works, it cannot be accurate in any way. Once you've got matchmaking with that long of a delay, it's just sort of whatever at that point. Hell, that in reverse could be explaining some things, because maybe some killers are getting matched with survivors much better than them just because killer queue times are absolutely terrible. And maybe because this kind of started around Ghoul, but people were playing Ghoul, so it didn't feel so bad. Now that we're with Springtrap, who is a weaker killer than Ghoul, it might feel worse, even though it's, again, kind of been the exact same thing. So I guess the main thing I want to reiterate here is a lot of this is not that the game has changed in any way. It's just kind of people's perceptions to things and people's realization of things that are already in the game has changed a bit. And look, you can argue semantics about that and say, well, that does mean the games have gotten harder. That's true. Your matches might be harder because of any number of these reasons. But the point is, the game systemically has not really changed in any meaningful way in years to warrant the discussions and the cataclysmic catastrophe that everyone is trying to word this as. So I'm hoping that I kind of showed, at least with examples, a couple of things that are just not really much different. And although your games might feel harder, and again, I can never tell you you're wrong with that, just like you can't tell me I'm wrong where I've said I have noticed absolutely no change. We're just talking about anecdotal experiences here, but a lot of the facts that these complaints are based off of are just straight up incorrect. And so hopefully I don't know, showed a little bit of that. And there's definitely some possibilities with some of these things, but I really don't think it's as bad as people are saying. And it's kind of an example of metas changing and people just choosing to not adapt to it. So maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I'm not saying this as an absolute authority of truth or anything like that. This is just what I've noticed over time, and I kind of wanted to rant about it a bit after watching some comments and a lot of people really just kind of mass hysteria-ing themselves after the single report of kill rates dropping. That's when all this hysteria started. I hadn't seen a single discussion about this before that. It all started right then, which is why I think this truly is mass hysteria. But that's it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.